Welcome to the Organizational Maneuverability Radio Show, defying gravity so your team can soar at altitude, with host Marshall Goldsmith, executive coach Randy Swaim. Audio and video. Okay, and it's recording. Well, hello. Welcome to the Organizational Maneuverability Podcast Show. I'm executive coach Randy Swaim, and I'm glad to have all that are listening and watching and observing and stuff. And just to let you know, we have a good guest on the show today. His name is Zen Benefiel, and I'm honored to have him here today. And so at this point, Zen, if you will, take a minute and just introduce yourself so that the listeners kind of know a little bit about you.
All right. Well, there's a lot to know about me. I'll give you a little bit.
As long as we're done by midnight tonight. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we might be able to manage that. Had an interesting introduction in life. I was orphaned and adopted. And so that kind of drove my curiosity for connection my entire life.
That is cool. I did not know that. That's awesome.
Thank you. Wonderful parents. I actually met my birth parents later on, which really added to the spice because it was a quest that I had been on for decades and it manifested. So it's amazing how this is an example of how your intent, your desire, and your interaction without attachment actually produces results.
Yeah.
Later on, I went to college early on, pre-med program, bailed, got married, raised kids, went to work in the aerospace industry, worked as a production control coordinator for an aerospace company in charge of $7 million a month in my mid-20s, and eventually got the company to institute interpersonal skills classes because they came to me to find out why I was at the top of the production charts, which is kind of interesting. You know, most things, as you know, are rather militaristic, a command and control structure, especially in aerospace at that time. So then left the industry, started out on my own, went through divorce and expulsion from church, or at least an attempt. And it was just a pure hell for me. And then I restarted and I hit the reset button. It's like, okay, I'm going to follow my heart. So I went, produced and hosted a television show for a couple of years, went back, got my MBA and then at University of Phoenix. Then I got a teaching cert, taught high school for almost a decade. At the tail end of that, I went back to school, got an MA in organizational management, and then wrote a business plan for a model school and community as my project. And then went from there into transformational coaching and partnering facilitation for building road and bridge construction projects. That gave me the opportunity to really put into more full use of how and what I learned in helping people to find themselves, integrate their own understanding, and allow that facilitation process of people, places, and things in their own lives to produce magnificent results.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I also, part-time, a couple of times a year, I ran the Tempe Arts Festivals and the Fiesta Bowl block party, 250,000 people in one night and 250,000 people in a weekend, respectively. Wow. So that was another opportunity to step in the middle of chaos and find order.
That's very aligned with organizational maneuverability. No two ways about it. So
absolutely. And,
cool.
From an organizational standpoint, you know, there's such a thing, ambidextrous organizations, right? Where you've got the two sides of it, the exploitation side and the experimentation side. Right. And those two often don't get merged in order for the companies to survive. And especially after COVID now, companies have to be agile. They have to be able to change on a dime. They have to be able to be in the market. Most importantly, the workforce boundaries have changed from their perspective. They don't want to be manipulated, controlled, used as fodder to produce widgets for profit. they want to have a life.
Yeah.
And they want to be respected, honored, understood, supported in the work. And leaders now are recognizing, oh gosh, there's this new thing about servant leadership, right? Well, what is that? You make sure everybody has what they need, because they're the ones that get the work done, not you.
That's right.
It's up to you to support them so that the work can get done and get done most effectively. And of course, we both know happy people get more done with less supervision and will exceed your expectations every time.
And if you think about it too, very aligned with what you just said, in today's world, so often the factors that sort of sneak onto the scene that you, the manager, the leader, did not realize at the time, it's the people that are working with it at the point of attack are the ones that see it first. And it's kind of what you're saying there.
Well, and here's where Maslow's hierarchy needs to be flipped. Right? Self-actualization is not the last thing.
That's right.
It's the first.
Yep.
So how do we do that? Right? Well, that's where the coaching, the consulting, and the personal experience and the delving into how that works that I've spent the last 50 years researching, studying, implementing, exploring, experimenting, find out what works, changing the theory into practical and pragmatic understanding.
Yeah.
Which is really the most difficult part of that, because you're not willing to suspend your belief systems and test everything. How do you do that? Well, you see an instance and you ask questions, you're curious. You don't project a prescriptive order or solution based on what you think might work, because, as you know, things aren't set up in thinking. They're set up vibrationally with and I know that kind of broaches the woo-woo part of things, but it's not really woo anymore. These are things that spiritual adepts have understood for millennia. And now it's in science that everything is energy. Well, how does that energy work? You feel it, you sense it, you don't think it, you respond to it, you ask questions.
Yeah. And if you think about it, so much of our thinking today is not just in defining what we do, but it's about
control.
It's about awareness of what's really happening and our ability to process and gain some understanding of what the real thing is happening. And that is what is so often missing. And that is
that's what I'm saying. Most of that thinking is about the number one thing, and that's control. And VUCA even increases that desire for control. Because you're dealing with an unknown. And so you've got to get comfortable in the uncomfort. How do you do that? Again, you're curious. You step back, you ask questions, you observe, you sense first. There's an ancient philosophy that the indigenous have offered, and it's called the three brain system: the gut, the heart, and the head.
Yeah.
And you process in that order, right? We know that medically now, scientifically, there's more neurosensors in the gut than there is in the head. Well, why were we designed that way? We don't use it. Our bodies are instruments. We forget about them. We operate from the shoulders up. And then shove all of that back down into the body and wonder why we are sick or diseased or uncomfortable or a mess, which can happen. So how do you get through that?
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's what a lot of people forget about is when you look at the concept of neuroscience, yes, the brain assesses a lot of that, but so many people just want to go in with dictating their own thing. And if it's not what I wanted it to feel like, then I just don't do it.
Well,
but a true brain thing, in the way your brain processing works, is to get a sense of what I'm experiencing, like you said, down here sometimes, and really understanding and processing it.
The body is a transceiver.
Yep.
We have neglected understanding it as part of that self-actualization, self-realization process.
Yeah.
right? And the only thing that we truly, really want, honestly, is to love and be loved.
Mm-hmm.
Now that sounds really far out, doesn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
yet, when I spoke those words, how did it feel? How did it land with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's something that's very important for understanding the real situational awareness of the situation. There's a lot more to it than just the rote, superficial academic stuff, and that's what a lot of people
You
don't
need to know
realize in
that.
today's
You know,
world.
that's the
Yeah,
reason I
you
got
do.
degrees. One, the MBA was the hard skills. The MA was the soft skills. So now
Mm-hmm.
I have proof, right, that I understand this stuff. I did already. However, the world requires credentials.
Yeah, and you know it's interesting too with what you're saying. It does, but with what you're saying, one of the things I throw out to people is, as a leader, are you aware of when your team members are communicating something where they are experiencing a certain aspect of what you're talking about that they don't understand, and how are you really going to connect with them in such a way that they become very successful and become aware of that? And those are things that a lot of people in today's world do not understand.
It starts by asking questions and shutting up.
Yes, it does.
And listening.
Yes, it does.
Not just listening to respond, but listening to understand. You know, I had a great mentor, lawyer. He's actually the Western attorney for the new Karmapa, which is one of the Buddhist lineages.
Mm-hmm.
He's Jewish by birth, right?
Yeah.
At any rate, he has black belt in Aikido as an instructor, was president of the American Society for Alternate Dispute Resolution for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And he says there really is no conflict. There's only misunderstanding. Whoever comes to the table arrives with their own dictionary, and they speak and listen from it.
Mm-hmm.
Until you understand the others, you're not going to communicate.
That's
you're
right.
always going to have missed understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing how many times when I'm working with a client or just people that I'm leading kind of thing, also, it's amazing how many times where I've asked a question. In fact, my autobiography kind of mentions one or two times of this, where I ask a question and then I do this. I go, because I don't just dictate to them something that I want it to be. I let them truly process and sort it out and really experience that with them.
Absolutely.
And it's a key difference. And it's a real coaching, facilitative leadership style.
Well, and when you know, because of your own acumen and understanding and observation capacity and
Mm-hmm.
willingness to be in that place, then you can ask the questions, knowing what the trends show and where you want to
Mm-hmm.
take them. You can ask the questions that guides them there, and they find their own answers rather than you giving them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then all you need to do is corroborate, confirm, and then execute, right?
That's true. That's true. And well, I tell you, that is key. And let me ask you this, I mean, you don't have to give any, names or anything like that. So we want to be ethical with it. But can you think of particular situations where you were involved with somebody and you saw sort of a revolutionary thing happen with them in the way you were maybe interacting with them in their situation or whatever? Yeah, well, like I say, you don't have to give any names or anything like that, but just
an instance came up right away, and this was in my partnering session facilitations.
Okay.
It's the only one that I was brought into for a refresher.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I didn't do the original one, but I was hired to do the refresher. And it was with some construction companies here, or a construction company here in Arizona on a fairly large project in northern Arizona, and they were having problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the meeting, as I was conducting it and facilitating the conversations, the main problem was between the Egyptian project manager, male,
Yeah,
and the white female office administrator, for ADOT.
Yeah.
So it was cultural.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody saw it. But in the room, as I'm having this discussion, it was obvious, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I brought it out.
Yep.
And the simple recognition of, for lack of a better, what is,
Mm-hmm.
no emotions, just the facts, ma'am.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep.
Then you can look at it and extricate the conflicting emotions in it, because that's the core of what happens in that division or diversion
Mm-hmm.
that isn't project aligned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then I took we had a meeting, there was probably 25, 30 people in it. And in the break, I took the two of them aside and we had a conversation that here's what's going, because I didn't want to embarrass them right? Because those kinds of things, when you're calling somebody out and asking them to step up, you can't do that in a major room. And I find it really appalling when I go to these self-development workshops where that's the first thing they do.
Yeah.
They call people up and they disassemble them. That's horrific.
Yeah.
And people pay money for that.
Yes.
Anyway,
but that's valuable. And I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting, very aligned with what you're saying. There's been 2 times, and this was like 2 decades ago, even before I officially became an executive coach and everything, that I realized that a coaching facilitative style was kind of how my leadership was being developed and everything, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But I was training a group of pilots on kind of a collateral aspect. And one of the groups were instructors. And actually, really, in both groups, they were instructors in 2 different companies that I was with and everything. But what was amazing on one time, you could tell that just before we started the class, you could tell they were struggling with something inside and in here and everything. And what I did is I kind of let them kind of talk a little bit. And I mean a little bit, not 30 minutes or anything like that, or not 25 minutes or anything, but let them talk a little bit about it. And I listened. And in one case, there was one person who, was kind of hearing the discussion of what they were saying and all, and went up to talk to the facility manager kind of thing. And I saw him come down. And when he came down, because at the end of it, I said, okay, well, you guys ready to begin now? And they all went, yep. And so we started talking about the course and everything like this and presenting it. And he heard us doing that. And he went up there and he came up and applauded me after it was all done and everything. And there was another time where it was kind of with a bunch of instructors, jet instructors. And one guy, I won't mention his name, but one guy actually was an F-4 pilot in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And he had actually shot down 2 MiGs and stuff. So he was sort of well known for a lot of what he brought and everything. But I was getting ready to teach these instructors something, and they had, you could tell they were struggling with one or 2 things just inside and here.
I'm sorry, but Randy, I got to say, war is just a despicable human interaction.
It is. It can be. I mean, there's sometimes when you got to defend, but it's not that. But he was what I'm saying is he was very proficient as a pilot and all that kind of stuff. And
in the future, I appreciate that, that the proficiency and all those things are developed. However, as we look forward, especially now, we've got a world that's just horrible.
Yeah.
One other thing that has advanced for me is I'm now the operations director for a global peace movement called Live and Let Live.
Yeah. Cool.
There's 2 aspects of it. There's principles, a legal and a moral.
Yep.
The moral is being an excellent human. And so there's aspirational values that we work with.
Yep.
Legal is what's important, and that's don't aggress.
Yeah.
And our long-term goal is to calibrate the law to remove aggression. Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the only ways that we can move forward collectively to create freedom and peace.
Yep. Yep. And but the only thing I was going to mention with this is because of the way that I did it, I could tell that they were kind of struggling with one or two little things that were going on right now. And I let them sort of discuss it just for probably not more than 5 or 8 minutes and whatever. But what was amazing is at the end of the discussion, I said, "So you guys ready to begin?" Kind of thing. And
Sure.
the guy that was the F4 guy from decades ago kind of thing, he was sitting right in front of the podium where I was standing. And he looked at me and he said, and of course like I said, he's retired military and all that. And he looked at me and he said, "One thing I got to share with you, Randy." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I'd work for you any day," because of their experience on how I did that. Because I didn't just go with rote control freak stuff, but I let them connect and come to be kind of thing.
You know what I find, Randy? As a facilitator, right? That's the third piece of the trifecta of leadership, right?
Yep.
You've got managers, leaders,
Yep.
and facilitators. The facilitator has the balance of the leadership and the management philosophy.
That's right.
Which often, for instance, in the partnering workshops and even in my coaching, I don't look for accolades.
Yeah.
I need them. What I seek is the accolades for the others. Some of the partnering sessions that I did, there's an award in the construction industry called the Marvin M. Black Partnering Excellence Award. And so those kinds of things for the project team, I'm not even involved at that point, right?
Yeah.
I come in and I do the foundational work that allows them to understand, okay, we've got these issues coming up then. We've developed the issue resolution plans ahead of time so that there's no work stoppage when it happens. And as you know, construction projects are usually 2 to 5 years long.
Yeah.
And those problems are recognized by the contractors and vendors moving as they explode the specs and the build project. So they know when things are going to happen. So having all of those things set up to begin with so that when that issue presents itself, they pull the trigger, it's done, everything's corrected, and they move on with no work stoppage. And sometimes work stoppage can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour.
And with some organizations, it can be the beginning of total failure on their part. And
Absolutely.
And so what you're saying is totally true on that. And the risks of that and the effects of that can be very, very bad sometimes, depending on the organization.
Well, partnering, for instance, and we're talking about leadership, partnering is part of that. When partnering was first introduced in Arizona in 1990, there was $19 million in litigation.
Yep.
They instituted partnering in 91. In 92, there was less than $1 million. Immediate effect.
Yep.
So all of these kinds of things, and even in organizations, the more communication, the more camaraderie, the more opportunity you give the employees and staff to interact and be part of the process. Gosh, that just sounds like it makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. And I'll tell you, very aligned with what you're saying is the aspect of real success very often happens in the way that you're creating a real synergistic feeling in your team. And when they feel like they're really connected like this and everything. And when you look at the neuroscience of some of the chemicals that your brain can release when they feel that synergy and that oneness and that, wow, I'm so glad to be a part of this. They become very radical.
You just triggered another really wonderful memory.
Cool.
And how I got the nomenclature, or a title, if you will, possibility coagulator.
Cool.
I was amazed when that came. So Dudley Lynch wrote a book back in the 80s called The Strategy of the Dolphin, and it was an organizational management book. In the late 90s, he wrote a book called The Mother of All Minds, and he was looking at how he can relate the differences between those who are steeped in competition and those who are steeped in collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And so he saw our development as an alpha mind and alpha chassis steeped in competition. That's where we were then.
Mm-hmm.
And so he presented the future model as a beta mind, still in the alpha chassis, because our bodies aren't going to change, but how we think can. So the beta mind understands the concept of oneness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't necessarily know how to implement it, because that's,
that's right.
wherein is the VUCA. And that's why we have it, because there's this inner sense that people have of a collective activity of being a human race, not more than a human race, of being a human family. We got caught up in the nationalist notions and forgotten that, hey, we're a global village. We need to learn to get along, or we're not going to survive, let alone thrive in our near future.
And if you think about it too, from a leadership standpoint, one of the big things, and I've told people this before, is very aligned with what you're saying too, is one of the big things that is your role is to help everybody on your team sense not only that synergy, but that the team believes in them. And there's this aspect of deep inside of us that when you truly feel and experience that, magical results can happen.
Absolutely. And this is how, when I was in the aerospace industry, I first realized, there needs to be a bridge between best practices in both business and spiritual practices, right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, all right, what kind of business name could I come up with to register? And the thought of Be the Dream. So I registered that in January of 1988. Hey, that's the banner that I use for coaching. Everybody has a dream. We help to achieve it. Now, what we don't realize is that dreams that we have early on, we aspire to achieve. We don't necessarily know how they're going to take place. I have a perfect example. You were talking about your autobiography. I wrote a pseudo autobiography of over 1,000 pages that I reduced to 500. And then, so in 1990, I produced and hosted a TV show called One World, where I talked to people about how they got where they were at, what prompted them to do what they're doing from both inner and outer perspectives, what fears they encountered, how they overcame, how they saw that fitting in with a common human experience around them, what advice that they could offer to overcome that. Well, at that time, I wanted to emulate two people, Bill Moyers, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and Jeffrey Mishlove. He's well known, but not in every circle, right? Jeff had a PBS program at the time called Thinking Aloud. And I hoped someday to be worthy of an interview with one of them. That was in 1990. 2018 rolls around. I get a voicemail from a website that I manage. It's Jeffrey. And he says, hey, I just did an interview with the person, and I think your audience would like it. Would you take a look at it and see if you can help promote it? And I was like, wow, I'm thinking, when I first heard his voice, I recognized it. Excuse me, before he even announced who it was. And so I listened to the interview, did a blog post, sent the link to it to him, along with a PDF copy of my autobiography. It's called Stubbing My Toe on Purpose. Subtitled Toe Being Theory of Everything. And it's subtitled A Seminal View of Consciousness, Cosmology, and the Congruence of Science and Spirituality. Well, 3 days later, I get an email from him. Hey, would you like to come talk about it? So here's a 28-year dream come true that I didn't particularly work for specifically, yet I held the integrity that I had in the initial desire for it, and knowing that I'd have to maintain that that integrity in my own life, how I worked, behaved, acted, produced, all of those kinds of things, for any of that to even become possible.
Yeah. And that's key, because, as leaders and all that, we have to model all that we're talking about and everything.
Absolutely.
And that's a key aspect of leadership. And it's not just about controlling people. It's about helping them experience what we're modeling.
We're like little kids in the workplace, right? We watch our parents and we observe how they behave, not what they say.
That's right. Cool. Well, listen, I know it's coming up to the 30 minutes on this and stuff, but it's been
we can go for hours.
And who knows, maybe we can get another show on sometime if you want. But there's
rolling.
But I know we're coming up to the end of the 30 minutes, and I know you got something you got to go to here pretty soon. But
well, for you, I can spare a few moments.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say I appreciate that. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. I've been an honor to have you on the show today. But let me just share anything that you would like to leave that would be sort of the closeout. Something, maybe a message that you would leave for the listeners, and maybe an insight or something like that you'd like to leave today.
Sure. Wow, there's a bunch of them. Let me see if
Okay. So that could take another hour. No, I'm just kidding.
Days. I would say, bottom line, love yourself first. Learn what that is.
And you know what? The second part of that, you have my compliments. Learn what that is for real. Yeah.
We all have different ideas. Our idea of love growing up, if we come from a dysfunctional family, our idea of love is totally different than one that comes from a nurturing family.
Yeah.
So that needs to be understood.
But it can also be developed back to what it should be, even
Absolutely.
if you come from that.
It's all the process of recognizing what is and making the choices. And here's the second thing.
Okay.
Everything is a choice. You have them.
It is. And your decisions are critical. No two ways about it.
Make the best choices. Take the time. Feel your way through. Don't think your way through a situation. That's going to come. There will be part of that. And I'm not negating the fact that there's thought involved. However, the first thing is to sit and sense and allow those emotions, the thoughts, the considerations to bubble up, and they'll be more pure, they'll be clear, and often you will know the exact direction you need to take from that.
Because your processing was able to do that well.
It's a flow. It's energy.
That's right.
That's what we seek. We don't like the pushing and pulling.
But you can process it and really understand the reality of this situation and what is the right move for going forward.
That's where I come in.
Yeah. And me too, when I'm working with pilots or business leaders and stuff. And I
have a feeling that my special sauce, if you will, is a bit different. You deal, and granted, you deal with some very necessary things at an organizational level and practical sides of things, pragmatic as well. On the deeper notion, that's where my expertise, because and my willingness to be there in that open, supportive, secure, safe space for others.
Yep. And I'll tell you, for radical success, that is so critical. And like you said, and you're critical, because I use the VUCA algorithm quite a lot, because that is what defined, fighter, combat stuff and everything. I
got a different rhythm that I like. I'm a drummer.
There you go. But it's but in organizational maneuverability, the VUCA is a key sense of that aspect too.
Sure.
And so it's you have my compliments on that. But I'll tell you, I know that you got some other things to do today. Let me just say before we end up, and those were a couple of good sort of closing points to make to people because they're very valuable. And but I'll let you get ready to get on to your next one, and we'll go ahead and close this out. And for all those listeners, it's again. I
would like to plug one more thing, Randy.
Go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
And this has been a culmination of I came off a 30-year hiatus from my first TV show. And I started producing One World in a New World in April of 21. We aired our first show in June. We hit 1 million views in March of this year. And it delves into the very things that we're talking about and bridging the spiritual and the business practices. Cool.
Well, I'll tell you what, that you have my compliments on that, and that's a great way, I think, to close it out today. It's a good point. It's a very good thought to leave with people.
Thank you so much for
and
Randy.
You bet. Well, I'm glad to have you here. And for those listening, again, this is Marshall Goldsmith, Executive Coach Randy Swaim, and our Organizational Maneuverability podcast. And it's just been an honor and a privilege to have Zen Benefield on the show today. And who knows, maybe he'll be on another show sometime. So, but listen, I hope you have a great rest of the day. I know you've got something, another meeting you got to get on to, and we'll let you go with that. But it's been an honor and a privilege having you here, Zen.
Ditto, Randy. Thank you.
Okay. You take care, okay?
Absolutely. Only if you give it.
Okay. You know what? There you go. That's leadership.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.